All right, awesome. I have Jeremy Slate today, which I'm very excited to have you here. So thank you. Or Jeremy is an entrepreneur, author. He's a speaker and a podcast host for Create Your Own Life podcast. What does it mean to create your own life?
It's funny because the name came from an argument I had with my dad. I was a high school teacher for like 2 years and I was absolutely miserable. Like YouTube was kind of a new thing. So kids had figured out like how to get me really mad and then video it and then put it on the internet. So I was getting in trouble at work because of like how terrible these kids were to me. And I just wasn't happy. At the time, my mom had just had a stroke. So I was living back home helping my dad take care of her. And I had just decided I was going to quit and just figure out what to do. I didn't really have a plan. I was going to do something business wise. And he's like, well, son, that's like not how life works. You kind of do something for 40 years and then you die. I'm like, well, that sounds terrible. I want to create my own life. And that was kind of like where the whole idea came from, because at the same time, like I think too many people are living a plan that's given to them. They aren't figuring out, what do I like? What am I good at? What is my skill set and what do I enjoy? And that's not to say that work has to be something that it's just like, I don't feel like I'm ever working. Come on, there's days where work is hard. There's days where work is difficult. But I think if it's something you enjoy and something you're good at that meets your skill set, it is easier to put in the effort that's required to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I do think, our parents just in a different era, right? Where we are kind of seeing that we can do things differently. What kind of adversity or struggles have you had to overcome or face getting out of where you were into entrepreneurship?
Gosh, lots of things. I guess first and foremost, I wasn't really someone that was an entrepreneur, if that makes sense. I was a teacher. So I think that was the hardest thing, is figuring out like, how do you get that skill set and how do you figure out what to do? Also, I wasn't with a super supportive friends group either. Like when I started to do something a little bit different, it was like, well, why are you doing that? This is all you deserve. So that was really difficult to deal with in the beginning. And I think, frankly, I handled it really poorly. I had to get better at how do you handle that situation, because I think initially you kind of bite back and you kind of want to fight with people about it. And it doesn't really help you, right? It creates more antagonism. So I had to figure out, how do you take that difference of opinion, acknowledge it for what it is, and just kind of leave it and let somebody have their opinion and just kind of do. And then what happens, obviously, it wasn't perfect in the beginning and it took some time to get there. What ended up happening is kind of the longer you keep pushing with the thing you're doing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually you start to see some success, that opinion starts to turn, right? And you'll see that a lot of that opinion actually turns into support, which is kind of cool. It doesn't happen across the board. I'm not going to say it happens everywhere. But initially, the way I approached it, I think, made things a lot harder for me. And it's interesting, too, because I think having no business background was good for me in some ways, but also bad for me in some ways, right? Because I made a lot of mistakes, which took a lot of time to kind of work my way out of, not understanding business credit and things like that, not understanding how to run a payroll. Those are things that I know how to do very well now, since we manage a team of 15. But like at the same time, out of the gate, that really was hampering to me. But here's the thing I will say was positive. Because I had no business background, I was willing to take a lot of stupid risks that people with a business background wouldn't do. And I learned a lot in that perspective.
Yeah, that's great. What advice do you give someone that's listening right now that maybe wants to take a step out of their comfort zone, whether it's, health-wise or, launching a business or something, to get over that not caring what other people think so that you can just be who you are authentically and share your message?
Well, I think the first thing is like, and this is going to sound a little bit ridiculous, but like, how many of those people that you're living your life for would actually die for you? And when you look at it, it's a very small percentage, right? You know what I mean? Like if times got tough, there's some people you could call in the middle of the night and they'd be there to help you. But it's very few people that would actually do that. So I think first and foremost, when you learn to look at it like that, it kind of changes your perspective dramatically. That's the first thing. But I would say as well, it's kind of realizing, because I think we have this idea when you start something, you're going to be either like really successful right away or you're going to win right away. For some people, that's really true. And I don't want to tell you that's not going to happen for you. But for most people, there's a lot of trying and failing and working at something. So I would say you have to be willing to stick it out a few years, frankly, to kind of get where you're going. And I think once you're willing to do that, you're going to see ebbs and flows and changes. But if you consistently are putting that idea ahead of you and you're working towards it, that's the bigger part. But I think so many people are short-sighted on where it's going. And then when they hit some adversity or when things don't go right or when the economy changes or whatever it might be, they kind of pack up and go home. And you have to understand, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Like in the book, The Iliad, right? In the book, The Iliad, the Greeks take their boats when they arrive in Troy and they burn them because there's no way to go back, right? They've burned the boats and there's no way to return. And I think that's how you have to look at it, is you have no other option. You're going to make this go right. Now, here's the hard thing as an entrepreneur. You need vision for 6 months from now, 6 weeks from now, and 6 years from now. You always have to be thinking about those things because decisions you make now could bite you in 6 months. They could bite you in 6 years. So you have to figure out, how do I deal with the situation now in a way that's going to actually solve the problem, but at the same time, that's going to not cause me more problems in the future. And that's never going to be perfect. You're going to go through different iterations, but those are things you have to be considering.
Yep, absolutely. How do you, like, you have small children, so how do you help them realize, I think that what you were saying about failure, I know is true for me. I just didn't realize that you have to fail a lot to succeed, right? And how are you with your children kind of trying to teach them that at a younger age?
I think a big part of it is giving them responsibility right away, right? I think a lot of parents don't do that. And we live on like almost 5 acres, and I'm in Hollywood right now, but usually we're in New Jersey. And I'm in 5 acres with 24 chickens, 150-pound pig, and all the sorts of things. My girls are out in the barn picking up eggs every morning because that responsibility is really good for them. They are, helping us with different projects in the yard. They're obviously the 8-month-old isn't doing those things. She's just kind of watching and gooing at you. But they're 8 months old, almost 4 years, and almost 7 years. So they have a lot of responsibility and they understand those things. I think a lot of times, and this isn't to say I'm a perfect parent or anything like that, but there's exchange in this universe, right? Like if you give something, you get something. And I think a lot of times kids want to contribute. They want to help. They want to, hey, Dad, can I help you in the kitchen? And parents will just say, no, I'll do it myself. So you figure out, well, what can they do? What part of it can they do to help? Because they want to contribute. Because here's what happens, right? If you don't allow someone to contribute and they just take and take and take and receive, they will become a criminal of some way, shape, or form because you are not allowing them to be in exchange for the world around them. And they want to exchange. But I think that's a really, really important thing to instill in them early on and also show them the value of work, but also the value of winning. Another thing we do as well is it's kind of coming back now since COVID, but before COVID, we traveled a lot more for work. But we take our kids on work trips with us. Like they've been to Thailand, they've been to England, my 6-year-old's been to like 13 different countries. So you figure out how can work also be a reward for them so they can understand like what it can create for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I love giving them responsibility. I think sometimes we're a little soft maybe in this generation of parenting, right?
My parents had me get a paper route at 11. So it's like, and it's, which is weird because I don't know that you can actually get a paper route anymore. But like had me get a paper route at 11. And that was a big thing of realizing responsibility. I had it till I was 18. I started with 80 customers in one route. By the time I gave it up, I had 3 routes and 300 and something customers, like 320 or something like that. So it's like you understand like the value in what that work creates. You also understand the value in work for you. I had a podcast that I put out today about like the actual work for its value, right? I think that's a really important thing because you understand like, okay, work produces money, it produces results, it produces these things, but it's also what it produces in you, right? Like the doingness of work and how it makes you feel and what it does. It's a sense of achievement. And I think that is a real value in work. We have a wood burning stove at our house, which is one of the major ways we heat our home. We use oil heat too, but it keeps the oil bill down to use a wood burning stove. I'm chopping wood 3 nights a week to make sure we have enough wood to go, right? Like those are really important things and they're valuable things. And that work that I do, it doesn't lead to money, but it helps my family, right? Like there is value in work. And I think work really helps you build your self-esteem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's super important, especially that we can teach them these things at a young age, right? So that they can kind of learn a little faster than we did, hopefully.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on, the school system or just the way things are in setting us up for success or lack thereof?
That's tough. I don't think you and I have ever talked about that. Are your kids homeschooled?
So we were. My two older kids are in school now, but I'm thinking about going back. It's more was I wasn't in the right space. You know what I mean? To be home with them. I think when you're home with them, you have to be mentally equipped. I think a lot of people are not. You have to be emotionally stable, if you will. You know what I mean? And there was
That's
just
a
a lot
funny
of
way to
things
put
that
it.
happened. But
Yeah, I understand. No, I understand what you're saying too, because like you have swings from work and stuff like that, and you have to make sure you don't bring those things to what you're supposed to be doing with them, or hey, we have to skip this lesson today because I have the XYZ meeting. Like I get it, that can be hard. We've kind of so it's interesting because I'm not a big believer in school systems as they are, and I had a weird school system experience myself. Like I don't know what yours was like, but I know we went to school like in the same area, so I don't know, it might have been similar. But like for me, I started out at Hamburg Elementary, and I was like a really smart kid. This isn't like to toot my own horn, but like I was one of those kids that I finished my work really fast, and then I would just be a pain in the ass for the next like 40 minutes to an hour, right? I got kicked out of kindergarten for singing "Friends in Low Places" by Garth Brooks. So like that's what I would do in school when I was done with my work. So they had a meeting with my parents. This is in first grade. We're going to put him in the talented and gifted program. My parents are like, oh, that sounds great. Like he's going to, be mentally worked hard, I guess would be a way to put it, right? So like first grade ends and we get in the second grade, and the talented and gifted program was, we're just going to give you things that are longer because you waste our time. It wasn't like more challenging. It wasn't harder. So I caught on to that game pretty quickly. So I went back to just wasting everyone's, screwing around in school again. And so they had a meeting with my parents, and they said, so the only way we're going to solve this, because obviously he's very emotionally disturbed and he has very aggressive ADHD, we're going to need to medicate him, or he's going to have to find a different school. So my parents, though they couldn't afford it, they put me in private school at that point in time. So I had a really weird school experience because of that, because I was always self-motivated. I like to learn on my own. I've always been kind of somebody that's just learned on my own. I think self-pacing is great. So we started out homeschooling. It's been a little bit harder since, because we're on like a long-term business trip in California right now. We're out here till I think like May. So what we ended up doing is putting our oldest daughter, because our youngest daughter isn't quite in school age yet, in more of a self-paced schooling. So it's not like a traditional public school. It's more of a private school where it's called Applied Scholastics. And basically everybody's on the same like course packs, if that makes sense, but they're all kind of working at their same pace, and the instructor helps them what they need. Because my daughter's really smart and she finishes things quickly. So she started out the year in kindergarten. She's halfway through first grade, right? Because that's how it works. You don't just change first grade because the year changes. You change when you finish the coursework. So that's been going really, really well for us. I know like Montessori schools are typically considered to be pretty good as well. I'm just not a big fan in traditional education because I just don't think it enables kids to actually do something. Like the problem is it's memorization and regurgitation without understanding or the ability to use it, right? And that's why you get kids that come out of college with a degree that they don't know how to use. And application, to me, that's when I'm interviewing people for a job, one of the number one things I care about is aptitude. Aptitude is the ability to actually use the information that you have and use it quickly and efficiently. And somebody that doesn't have a high aptitude is not going to be great in your company, your organization, or working for you. So, because I know a lot of people that have a high IQ, but they're really smart and take forever and don't know how to do anything, right? Like, so it's an interesting balance between IQ and aptitude. And that's, I'm trying to find a type of schooling for my kids that helps to sharpen that. Sorry, that was a long-winded
yeah,
response.
no, it's great. And I love to hear it because I mean, where I'm at, there's not that many options. Like we had a homeschool co-op, which is great, but there's just not many other options than that, right? Like you're doing a co-op, you're homeschooling, or they're going into school. So it's nice to hear that, where you are, that there's just something else, right? Like that's not
Well, there's lots of different
just,
options too if you look online. Like there's a great organization called Blue Manor Academy, which is kind of a virtual version of like homeschool. My friend Britton Latulip runs it. It's a really great organization. I know also Dr. Ron Paul has an entire free school curriculum online that's called the Ron Paul Education. So there's a lot of great options out there. But once again, it depends on work life and what everything's like for you as a parent as well, because, if it depends on what your schedule is. So it's when you're kind of playing that game, it can be difficult to figure out what works,
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is so many options. You just have to be open and see the possibility instead of, the limitations. I was actually looking into some more of the online programs before I decided to put them in. But, my daughter Delilah, she's in a similar, she's in fourth grade and she's testing for like seventh grade math, but it's like, what are they gonna do in
That's
school,
awesome.
for that? It
Well, and
is, but it also,
schools don't know what to do with that. That is the problem, right? Like what they do is they tend to penalize that, right? Because that kid's going to ask a lot of questions. That kid's going to be done fast, and there might be other kids in the class that are like super super far behind. There's a book I'm like halfway through right now. It's called Enough is Enough by a woman named Barbie Rivera, and her son, who ended up as an adult being brilliant and doing like some absolutely wonderful things. They told her in like first grade that the kid was like mentally handicapped. He was totally fine, by the way, but this is like how they were going to handle a kid that was smart and ahead of his time and whatever, because the way schools function is everybody has to be at the exact same pace. But everybody learns differently. Somebody might learn something in a week where somebody might learn something in 2 years. That doesn't mean they're stupid. That doesn't mean they're not smart. But we all learn at different paces. And that's why I really like a self-paced type of education, because you even look at somebody like me, like I was a decent student in school. Like I wasn't an incredible student. I was like a 3.3 GPA. So it wasn't like crazy good in high school. But like I was somebody, grad school was actually where I did better than even college, right? It was where everything kind of clicked for me. Things click for people at a different period in life, and everybody learns at a different pace. So I think understanding that, you understand the school system isn't set up that way, right? It's set up for everybody has to have this. Everybody takes the test at the exact same time. Everybody takes this standardized test that the teachers pay and bonuses is determined by and whatever, which also isn't okay. So it's a difficult spot to be in. This is a real sore point for me. So
no, it's fine. I actually, I love that we're talking about it, because as I said, I'm thinking about going back, to homeschooling next year. And, my son is little too. So he's 2.5, he'll be 3. And I think that was one of my main struggles too, is having him here and then trying to teach them, you know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
So I found somewhere that he can go a couple days a week. And it's just, to me, like them being in school and out of school also gives me some clarity that when they are here with me, and even if we're doing just the bones, like they're learning, they're fine. They transition from being homeschooled and now public school, and they're just fine,
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it definitely is interesting. And I'm a big believer in learning by application too. Like I think the things I've learned best are, I worked for a house painter for, all through high school and college and grad school. And it's kind of like how I paid for things. And it was one of the best jobs I ever had, because it taught me so many things. And whenever my wife wants a room done, it looks like she hired somebody, right? But it's like, I think there's a lot of value in that. But then also as well, I've wanted to really understand things, right? So like you and I were talking about before I started recording here, my master's degree is in Roman emperor worship, believe it or not. It's like they can actually get a degree in that. And in the last couple of years, the whole idea of Rome has started popping up. I think it's like on TikTok was the main place, saying, what is your Roman Empire? Or what do you think about all day, right? Was kind of like the whole thing. And my wife's like, I think this is a really good point for you to talk about your education, because, they're talking about it. So what I ended up doing was doing a few different shows, and I was kind of like throwing out different angles that I thought could match modernly. And what I found was the thing that matched the best was the thing I absolutely knew nothing about. And I would say now it's the thing I actually know the most about, right? Because it was like, all right, well, I need to read this book and read that book and read this book and read this person and read this primary source. And to me, I learn when you give me something to figure out. That's how I learn. I think so many times we're given education without purpose or without application. And I think when you have that, or have kind of that necessity, it changes everything.
Yeah, that's a great point, I think, too. What you're saying, and then just what they're taught in school, that it's just like, why do I have to learn, these things? I mean, you get like the basics, but everyone's different and everyone's going to be going a different path in their life, right? Like my daughter hates to read. Her reading scores reflect that, because she does not like it. But math, she's flying and she gets it. So how can we teach our children to not only like, as you said earlier, like you have to do things that you don't like sometimes, right? But how do we teach them to chase things that they're good at learning in certain ways, or that they like to learn about?
Yeah, well, I think also like we've lost classical education in a lot of ways. And that's not to say that kids have to do this, but I took 13 years of Latin, because when you go to Catholic school, you take it from 6th grade on. And that means you take it in 6th grade to 8th grade, you take it all 4 years of high school. And then at that point in time, you're like, wow, this is kind of like second nature to me. I guess this will be my college language too, because why would I take Spanish? Because I'd have to actually go learn something. So you take Latin in college, you get into grad school as a classics major, and then you find that, oh, you need a language as part of your classics program because you have to translate something from one language to another and understand it. So I ended up taking a lot of Latin. But here's the benefit to that is I can look at a lot of American words that I don't know and take them apart. So I think there is a real value to language that I think we've lost. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be out there reading Cicero and doing these different things. But if you look at how we learned, like 150 years ago, let's say in the late 19th century, like 1850s, like in that area after before the Civil War, people were reading classics. People were learning Latin. And a lot of that was dropped after the Industrial Revolution because what we needed as a society changed, right? We needed people that can just build things in mass and build them quickly and not do a lot of thinking. So because of that, how we've educated people has changed dramatically. But I think what's happened is you've seen the reading rate go down. It's kind of wild. If you look at the literacy rate in the early 1900s versus now, it's actually lower, which is shocking because people aren't actually reading on the correct level and things like that because we don't have the same language skills. So I think that's a struggle a lot of people have. But I think the education system is one of the main points behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back, I know you taught history and you said you're coming back to
I barely
this idea
survived
of
teaching
Rome.
history.
Well, you've done great things by, your path and getting out of it and all of that. How do you think the Roman Empire has shaped us, or maybe as a society, how do men, I don't know if I'm wording this correctly because I don't know much about the Roman Empire, but I am interested in what you know about it. So how is it shaping, our culture today in America?
So, okay, there's a couple different angles we can go about this. And like the way I've been talking about it modernly is what periods in time relate most to where we are now. And I like to say history is it's not like that map in the mall that says you are here. It really is, it rhymes in a lot of ways. It doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Things are similar. I just wrote an article last night actually for my friend Quite Frank, who has a podcast called Quite Frankly that do a monthly newsletter. So I wrote something about the Ides of March, which is the day that Caesar was killed, and what does it mean to us? Because I think a lot of these things mean things to us because we see similar things throughout history. It doesn't mean they're exactly the same. So I think that's one part of it. And if you look at kind of things that we do that are a little weird and a little different, a lot of them come back from history. For example, the word inauguration, when a president takes office. If you look at augury in Rome was bird signs. It was the science of bird signs. They would look at the birds in the sky and say, 6 vultures. I think it's going to be a good day. Let's put the guy in office. Or they would pull out the liver from an animal and they'd look at the liver and say, that part of the liver looks good. Okay, let's go to war. So that's how they would make a lot of these decisions, is through this science of augury. Obviously, it's not a science, but I don't know what else to call it. So the word inauguration comes from someone taking office from bird signs. We still use the word. That's where it comes from. Or you look at something like a lot of the architecture we have. A lot of the architecture we have is Greco-Roman architecture. It's not quite Greek. It's not quite Roman, but it's Roman influenced by Greek, which is kind of the Hellenizing period of Rome, which is like 200 BC to like 200 AD, like around there. So a lot of the architecture we use is the same. You look at things like the Russian word Tsar or the German word Kaiser. Those both come from Caesar, right? That somebody's name became a title, which then became a title which was translated in other languages. Or the idea of a C-section, when a woman has a C-section, comes from the word cesarean section because there's a legend that Caesar was cut out of his mother because how could a man that great actually be born normally? And somehow his mother lived. So in that time period to have a C-section, I don't know how to be expected to live is pretty amazing. But a lot of the things we do now are very much things that we've done for a very long time, if that makes sense. We just kind of have a different spin on them. Now, if you want to look at what history can teach us, the thing that I often find myself looking at, because it's been in the media the last several years talking about the fall of the Republic and blah, blah, blah. And I think if you kind of look at America and where we are right now, I see 1913 as a very pivotal year. It's an absolutely pivotal year because there's 3 things that happened that year. There is the Federal Reserve Act, which is passed over the Christmas break of that year, basically when there's nobody around to vote on it. You have income tax, which I think is the 16th Amendment as income tax? You also have the 17th Amendment, which passes, which is State legislatures no longer have the ability to appoint senators. So now, because people hear that, they're like, oh, I want to vote for my senator. But you have to understand like the purpose in it, right? Like the reason that our framers came up with the system they came up with, people would vote for the Congress, right? So the people would have representation through the House of Representatives. The Senate was to talk about the will of the states, right? Because the states also have their own will, right? That's why, because if you have everything totally popular vote, then California and New York win everything. But the reason the Senate would exist is because everybody has 2 senators. So Rhode Island is just as equal as California, is just as equal as Texas. But when you change that, states no longer have representation. Everything went popular vote. So it was that year when America ceased to be a republic and America became a democracy. Not that I agree with it. You know, we were formed as a representative republic, but those 3 things dramatically changed what this country is. So when people talk about, oh, the fall of Rome's republic, I just don't think it's relevant. You know, I think Julius Caesar in America has come and gone. I think it's been a really, really long time. I don't think it's something in modern day. And the thing I look at is where we are is very similar to Rome's 3rd century AD. In 192 AD, Commodus, who's the son of Marcus Aurelius, dies, and he's actually murdered because they hated him so much. They try several times to kill him. The final time, he's finally strangled to death by a wrestler. And he's the first of what's called the year of the 5 emperors. So there are literally 5 emperors in one year because it's so much, you know, tumult that this guy has lost power in the way he lost power. And what ends up changing is it goes from being a politician emperor to a military emperor. Whoever has the most military power and the most money is now the person that's emperor. So what happens in the 3rd century is you have this massive immigration problem coming across the border. So people cease to be Roman because they need them to serve in the military. But then you also have this inflationary problem because you now need to pay these people for their military service. So by 284 AD, they're at 15,000% inflation. So I think if you look at those problems, they're very similar to what we have now. Obviously, we don't have senators and congressmen raising armies and calling themselves emperor. That's not really happening. But we do have kind of this immigration problem in some ways, and we do have this inflationary problem, which is the number one problem we have. And I think there's ways to do it wrong, which is to kind of keep doing it, and there's ways to do it right. One of the biggest after 305, there starts to be this shift between a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern Roman Empire. It's going to really split after about 280, but or 380, but you really start to see this shift. And the Eastern Roman Empire ends up being what we call the Byzantine Empire, and the Western Roman Empire is just called the Roman Empire traditionally. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire, they would have called themselves Romans. They wouldn't have called themselves Byzantines, but it's how historians call them to know what the heck to call them. So the thing Constantine does in 314 is he puts the Eastern Empire gradually over a 20-year period onto a gold standard. And he also forces them to pay their taxes and do these different things in gold. So he fixes the money. All those other problems are a lot easier when you have money that works. And that's why that Eastern Roman Empire lasts until 1453, like almost another 1,000 years, because the Western Empire falls in 476. So if we fix money and a lot of these things, we're in a really good spot. So to me, once again, this is the time period before a year ago. I didn't know as much about it. I know more about the change from a republic to an empire and what worshiping an emperor had to do with it. But as I've kind of read, I can't even tell you an obnoxious number of books, I think there is a big door for handling here if we start to fix economics, which is interesting because I think that is one of the biggest things that we're seeing the new administration go after is where are we wasting money? Where are we spending money? Or do we have too many people employed? So if you start to cut that, you can take a look at, well, how do we strengthen our currency? And I think that's how you fix a country. Sorry, that was long-winded, but there's a lot to it.
No, it's fine. I learned a lot. I'll probably have to listen to it again to get it some more. But there's a lot of people, I'm sure you know, that are not happy about where things are going. Do you think it's because of mainstream news that they just don't have all the details? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Gosh, they're not happy where what is going. Because if you asked me 3 months ago, I was not happy where things were going. But we were kind of teaching a lot of gender ideology stuff that I don't really agree with. And
I don't either.
lighting money on fire and things like that. Are there things I'm not happy with? Sure. I do not like a president that makes decisions by executive order. That's not how our country is supposed to work. But I think at this point in time, I don't know if we're able to go back to that. And you thank George W. Bush for that. But I honestly, I don't know what there is to not be happy about, because it seems like people are coming together. It seems like people are happy to be Americans again. And even look at the Super Bowl was more patriotic this year. You're seeing it. It almost became weird to be an American for a while, and you had to apologize for that, which seems strange. So I think if we can strengthen our own country, if we can get along more like people, we're in a good shape. Like come on, do you remember the 90s where like you could be a Republican or a Democrat and like you could just be friends and it was whatever, and then sometime in the 2000s that changed and it wasn't okay, and like I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get back to that, because do I like Bill Clinton? No, but the 90s are pretty good, so it's like I can't really complain. So I think at the same time, we could be headed in a really good direction if we figure out how to work together on some things.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. I think that honestly too, that, I mean, there's some outliers, but I think we are more together than, what the media or social media will even,
well, that's a
share.
really good point. Because like Stephen A. Smith, he's one of the guys on ESPN. He had Representative Hakeem Jeffries he's Democratic representative, I think from the Bronx, maybe? I don't know. He's from New York, but anyway. He had him on and he said, and Stephen A. Smith's a Democrat. He says, Representative Jeffries, I'm tired of hearing about January 6th. I'm tired of hearing about impeachments. I'm tired of hearing about this guy has been hit with 34 felonies because 77 million Americans told you you're wrong. So it seems like the higher amount of people just don't agree with it. He's like, so how are we going to work with these current conditions? And I think that's what we have to start doing, because on both sides, battle lines have been drawn so hard. And I think we have to figure out, number one, the mainstream media has been soaking it up because they make money off of the fact that we're mad at each other. So I think that's one thing we have to understand. But I think we have to get back to working together, but also get back to dealing in facts and data and how we feel rather than how we feel about things.
Absolutely. I think oftentimes like the media can, take one clip of something and change it completely, where it's like you really have to vet things out yourself. You really have to do your own research right now. It's not enough. I mean, I don't watch the news, but it's not enough to watch the news. You can't trust that,
Yeah, for me, like if a story comes out, oftentimes I'm just researching on Twitter and seeing what I can find about it. And then I'm looking at, okay, well, is this a good source or a bad source, whoever it might be? I'm also looking for, as somebody that reads history, I'm looking for primary sources. Like, what is somebody that was actually there? What did they say? Because if you find too often we're getting opinions and viewpoints and third-hand things, or someone that is familiar with someone else's thinking, which how does that even work? Like, you need primary sources. And I think that's one of the biggest things I'm looking for that we've kind of lost in media.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really just being able to think for yourself and make that decision based on, as you said, facts. Yeah. I want to switch gears just a little bit because I want to be mindful of your time, but I want to know,
I wasted a whole bunch of yours earlier when my camera wasn't working, so I apologize.
It's all good. It's all good. Technology and all the things. It's all good. As a high performer, how do you balance health, mindset, and your, family business?
It's tough because it's not always pretty, but I think the big thing is no matter what time of day it is, always trying to make sure I find time to work out. I prefer to do it in the morning, but sometimes certain days I just don't have time. Like, since I've been on the West Coast, a lot of my meetings are early because a lot of my meetings are on the East Coast, right? So it's like I don't have the same option I would have back home where I can work out at 7 a.m, because 7 a.m. here, it's 10 a.m., baby, and the world's already moving, right? So I think that's what you have to consider. But it's making time to do that because I do have to take care of myself. It's also always having time to do stuff with my kids, right? Like always, whether it's a walk or whether it's going someplace, like having those different things in is really, really important and vital. Because I think that's really all you can do is making time for those things. I wish it was perfect, but I don't have a better answer than that.
No, you're good. And I guess I shouldn't have said balance. I don't think
balance doesn't exist.
Think there is balance. Yeah, it doesn't. But there's the hope, right? We have hope that balance exists. But yeah, you really just have to be, what I have found is really 100% present in just whatever you're doing. And that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
Do you have any unconventional or overlooked habits that help you maintain your energy?
Cold showers. I've been a believer in that since 2014. I've been doing that. I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body, and that was a big thing that I done ever since
Oh,
then.
that's cool. I haven't heard that one.
Puts you in really good shape. It's good for fat loss. It's good for, how you're doing mentally. It's also good for your immune system. So it's a really, really good thing to have. What else do I do? Like, just fitness is the number one thing in my life. So I'm always making sure to do time for that. And I haven't had as much like weight time recently. So I've been more resistance training and stuff like that with bands and things like that. Yeah, I think those are, for me, those are a couple really big things. And then this is going to sound mundane, but I eat the same thing every day unless it's dinner time. Obviously, whatever the family's eating is what we're eating. But I literally eat the same meal every day for 20 years because it's just easy. Takes one less thing I have to
Okay.
think about and keeps my body in good shape.
I'm with you. I love it. You got to do what works. And I know as a, a busy parent and entrepreneur, you have to do it in a way that you're actually going to eat and take care of yourself, right? Because
Yeah, lots of chicken
if
and hot
not,
sauce.
yeah, we're on that bandwagon too. I'm definitely been upping the protein, which has been a little challenging, but it's good. I feel better eating more protein. So, if you could leave any one piece of advice for the next generation of entrepreneurs, what would it be?
I would say just realize that no one's coming to save you, and it is you that's going to have to make it, whether it's a win or a loss. I think far too often people fail because they wait for somebody else to save them. And, you'll have times like, I have salespeople. They do a great job. There's weeks where they have hit up a hard time and they might go flat for a week or two. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm not a salesperson, but it's my company. I have to go in and I have to make some sales sometimes. It happens. Happened last week. I had to jump in and handle a situation and kind of move on from there. So I think it's understanding that it always comes down to you no matter what. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do everything, but it does mean that you have to take more responsibility than most if you want to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing. One last question. What's next for you? Like, do you have any exciting projects or anything new on the horizon?
So it's a little bit further down the road, but I'm still really good friends with my thesis advisor from grad school, and we're working on a Roman Empire book. I know we've been on a little bit of hiatus while I've been traveling, but that's something I'm pretty excited for. We have to kind of get back and get another meeting on that. We have quite a bit written, but Roman Empire book we've been working on.
Nice. That is very exciting. Well, Jeremy, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. How can the audience find you?
Well, so what we do at Command Your Brand is we help people to appear on the right podcast and create the right impact. But at the same time, we've talked about Rome and empires rising and falling. And, I want to help people to build their empire, right? To really command their empire. So I put together a great free resource for people out there on how they can utilize the podcast, new media, and PR world. They head over to commandyourempire.com. They can grab that. If they want to know more about how they can work with my team, they can figure that over there too. But it's a great free resource. It's going to get you some wins right now and get yourself more attention. That is over at commandyourempire.com.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.